Good morning, everyone. Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to get started, we don't want to keep you waiting. We know you have lots of things to be doing, and we're eager for your presentation. I probably should mention that there's a copy of the Open Meetings Act in the back of the room. Other than that, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, it's that big time in the 2-year cycle where we bake a cake and we see how we all like it. And I'm anxious to go through this with you and maybe get some first impressions from you. First and foremost, I guess, as in terms of background that you already know, the budget is essentially a blueprint for what we want to accomplish as a community over the next couple of years. It's essentially a financial blueprint. And our budget this time, if you look at it in broad but meaningful terms, is composed of 3 components. Keeping the community safe is always a big job. Building transportation and infrastructure to support growth. We have advocated a growth trajectory from the beginning. And taking care of what we need. Those are the 3 components of this budget, and the plan is fundamentally designed to maintain Lincoln as a dynamic and growing economy. Cities that are thriving and growing face additional pressures and new challenges all the time, as you well know. In order to achieve our goals of keeping our community safe and building infrastructure for growth and taking care of what we have, the budget must address certain challenges. Those challenges are identified on the slide. These are the 6 factors that have most impacted our decision-making for the 2016-18 budget. And we'll go through them here one by one. The first challenge, of course, is funding the police fire pension. This slide shows the police fire pension is consuming a seriously increasing portion of the city's tax levy. The city's contribution to the pension was only $1.5 million in 2002. The 2016-18 budget would have needed nearly $13 million annually to meet the required funding amount. Recent action by the administration and by the City Council, action that we broadly describe, you and I, as the 13th check change, reduced that amount to about $8 million a year going forward. While this is an enormous improvement, the city still has to find another $1 million a year to ensure the plan is sound financially. Strain on the budget is really more than $1 million. If you look back at 2008 on the chart, we were contributing, you and I, to the budget about $3.4 million a year. In 2016, even with the 13th check reduction, we're up to nearly $8 million a year. So the budget has already absorbed a large amount of that increase without any other adjustment. But we need an adjustment for an additional $1 million. Public safety challenges. Public safety staffing is not keeping pace with city growth, whether you look at that growth as growth in geographic area or growth in population. Over the last 10 years, Lincoln Fire and Rescue has seen a 27% increase in calls, about 80% of those being medical emergency. On the police side, calls for services are actually down over the last decade. But still, police resources in certain aspects are being stretched as the city grows. We know, for example, that it's harder for police officers to coordinate emergency calls over a broader geographic area. Parks and Recreation. Parks and Recreation, the 10-year facilities plan, which the advisory board has worked on quite hard and constantly and with a great deal of discernment, has identified a $1.7 million gap between what we should be spending on repair and replacement and projected funding going into the future. Adequately maintaining our recreation centers, playgrounds, pools, parking lots, related facilities, keeps our kids safe and engaged and protects taxpayer investments, and so we want to pay attention to that. The Emerald Ash Borer, the EAB as we call it, cannot be stopped from destroying the vast majority of the city's 14,000 public ash trees. It can only be slowed. The Emerald Ash Borer has been verified in Greenwood now, short distance from Lincoln. That makes it very likely that it has arrived in Lincoln. We need to immediately make financial preparations to allow the Parks and Recreation Department to gear up to remove and to replace dying trees. On the transportation side, a growing community obviously is one that constantly works on traffic flow so that people spend less time in traffic and more time with economic production and with their families. Improving traffic flow requires a multi-pronged strategy. A 58% increase in the amount we spend on streets since 2010 has allowed us to progress quickly over the last 5 years. We need to continue that pace into the future for economic growth, for safe and efficient traffic flow, and to complete critical transportation projects. One of those projects, the South Beltway, is pivotal to moving traffic quickly and safely throughout South Lincoln. We've worked hard to find the $40 million local match to complete that project. Improved traffic signals and related technologies often move traffic more quickly, more safely, and at less cost than traditional road building. A city that wants to compete in the future needs to have these updated smart traffic solutions. Bus service is another critical component, so all citizens can access employment and education and health care. StarTran should have later hours, more frequent service, and more efficient, faster routes. That's what all our advisory groups are telling us. The experience of other growing cities has demonstrated how important public transportation investments are to growing businesses that need employees. Revenue is not keeping pace. One of the most expensive challenges for the upcoming budget is the decreased revenues from the city's telecommunications occupation tax. The occupation tax is charged on devices and data plans associated with phones, associated with landlines and smartphones, and cable TV services. Greater competition among providers and generational usage changes have led to a big reduction in the amounts being collected by the city. As a result, our estimates had to drop by $1.7 million for the upcoming budget. That's about half of the $3.3 million deficit we face as a city to balance this budget. As indicated, the budget faces a shortfall of about $3.3 million to maintain services at the current level and to fund the police fire pension. The city's tax-funded budget last time around was $173 million in the general fund budget. With a $3.3 million deficit, it seems relatively easy to suggest a 2% cut to balance the budget. The problem is that a majority of the budget is, for all practical purposes, off the table when considering cuts. If we do not want to cut, for example, police, fire, and 911, we cannot reduce the $66 million for public safety. Nor can we do much about the fixed costs of governments that's listed in the slide above. We have to pay them. When all these costs are subtracted out, there is only about $57 million from which to make cuts. 3.3 million out of 57 million represents 6% cuts for departments like parks and libraries, public works, and aging. That's why the Taking Charge budget survey focused primarily on the programs of these departments. The next slide further illustrates solving the deficit requires an understanding of the options. Most people will tell you that public safety should be the city's highest priority and that we should not cut police, fire, and 911 to solve a deficit. I agree with that assessment, as I suspect you do. The challenge is that 53% of our tax-funded budget goes towards public safety services, such as police, fire, and 911, and as a result, any potential cuts have to be focused on the remaining 47% of the budget. In the past, that has led to severe cuts in the programs that are important to our quality of life, such as parks, libraries, and aging services. We want to point out that the city has limited revenue choices available to solve the deficit problem if you choose to go in that direction. This chart shows the main sources of city revenues. Property taxes and sales taxes obviously are the largest slices of the revenue pie, combining for more than 70% of the total revenues. In the past, we've also collected about $11 million annually from occupation taxes, which is the third largest revenue source. We cannot increase the sales tax to help preserve city programs. The legislature allows cities to charge up to 1.5% in sales tax for their general revenue needs, and that is Lincoln's base rate today. Nor is there much flexibility in the revenues represented under the category all other sources, as they are primarily fee-based services and other dedicated funding sources, grants, etc. As a result, we cannot use these funds for anything other than their narrowly prescribed purposes. If we are to solve the city's telecommunication tax shortfall with a revenue solution, property taxes are the city's only viable option. Lincoln continues our amazing progress, thanks to you in large part, into the ranks of nationally recognized city, both for our strong economy and for our high quality of life. Our success is a tribute to our hardworking citizens, a thriving business community, a great education system, and our city's choice to invest in growth. The attributes that have driven our national recognition are not an accident, but rather the result of a well-conceived plan, a plan that started over a decade ago when the Chamber of Commerce's Angelou study sketched the initial vision of what Lincoln could be. Since that time, we have invested in a series of public-private partnerships that have helped us fulfill that vision. This is my favorite slide. Jamie's kids. Keeping Lincoln on the right path is not happenstance. It is a choice. When we choose to invest in a safe and secure community, when we choose to invest in a strong economy, when we choose to invest in a high quality of life, we continue the progress that Lincoln has made towards being a national leader. So, the budget plan makes the reasonable investments necessary to keep Lincoln strong and growing. The next few slides describe each of these budget items one by one. Keeping our community safe. Over 19,000 times last year, Lincoln Fire and Rescue was called upon to provide a quick and effective medical response. That's up 7.1% from 2014 and 22.9% since 2010. We can no longer sustain these increases in calls for service without a 7th staffed ambulance. Lincoln's crime rate continues to be low compared to other communities. While police calls for services have declined, the growth in the city's area, as previously mentioned, is a major challenge for LPD. There is simply more area to cover for each officer, stretching out our resources and making backup for other officers in high-risk situations more difficult. Crime has been a prominent topic in the community after several high-profile crimes in June and July, and that's why my budget includes funding for 6 additional police officers, including 4 brand new ones. Working together, the council and my administration added 2 officers last year, you will recall, but did not identify an ongoing funding source. This year, those 2 officers are now fully funded, so funding is included in this budget altogether for 6 police officers. Transportation, infrastructure. The South Beltway is now funded in the 6-year capital improvement program. It is a critical need. Every day, over 37,000 vehicles travel Highway 2. Diverting the growing traffic on Highway 2 will improve community safety, and it will reduce traffic congestion. The 2016-18 budget will also continue our record-setting pace on street investment. The community will invest $56.2 million in street projects in 2016-17, including $15.5 million in arterial construction improvements and $5.4 million in residential improvements over the next 2 years. The Greenlight Lincoln program takes advantage of the city's recent investment in conduit and high-speed fiber, allowing us to manage traffic in real time to better improve traffic signal timing. My budget reassigns 3 employees and necessary equipment to implement the Greenlight Lincoln program. I've included 5 new bus drivers in the 2015-18 budget to implement the Phase 1 recommendations in the recent StarTran Transit Development Plan. The new drivers will allow us to offer later and more frequent service. Changes will help us provide a more complete bus system that better meets the needs of our growing community. Transportation and infrastructure. The budget accelerates our water and wastewater main replacement program. It supports the entrepreneurs who create economic growth, and it protects the water supply also of the older neighborhoods. New employees and materials are needed to increase our water main replacements from 5.5 miles per year to 7 miles per year. Since water is a self-supporting utility, this will require a 5% increase in water rates. Wastewater continues to expand service into the Stevens Creek Basin and other growth areas of the city. These investments will allow continued growth of the city to the east and in other directions. A 5% wastewater rate increase is necessary to increase this progress. Taking care of what we have, taking care of our financial status. My budget includes $981,000 to fully fund the police fire pension to protect the city's AAA rating and to meet the city's financial obligations in a timely manner. Prudently managing our budget has earned Lincoln the highest ranking enjoyed by cities anywhere. Only a few select municipalities sharing that high ranking in the entire country. These high rankings translate more meaningfully to us into millions of dollars in interest savings to the city, and it is imperative that we fund the pension right now to protect future generations of Lincolnites from exorbitant contributions. Another matter upon which we should not wait. A natural disaster is clearly staring us in the face. The emerald ash borer will destroy nearly all the public ash trees in the community with a cost as high as $29 million attributed to the effort to remove and replace them. Dead trees are a safety hazard. They undermine home values and neighborhood appeal. Losing trees means we lose important allies in combating stormwater and flooding. Arborists and more equipment are necessary to adequately protect both people and property. $950,000 is budgeted each year to begin the removal and the replacement of 14,000 public ash trees. More of taking care of what we have. The administration's budget protects our parks and makes a responsible financial choice to fund their ongoing care and replacement costs. These are the everyday costs of providing services our community depends upon for strong and vibrant neighborhoods, for a safe and healthier population, programs that keep kids in positive activities, and that supports the green space that adds so much to our quality of life. My budget adds $400,000 per year to the CIP to address our parks repair and replacement needs, with increased Keno revenue allowing us to budget another $400,000. We, by this means, cut the park's maintenance deficit nearly in half. With these funds, we can make essential repairs like renovating playgrounds to keep them safe and operable, replacing worn out roofs and floors in recreation centers, repairing and replacing trails, and making upgrades to meet ADA standards in our various parks and recreation facilities. A community growing in area and growing in population obviously increases the city's responsibilities, and we need a budget that supports that growth. One challenge at City Hall is that we're still recovering from the 2008 national recession. In 2009, we cut 160 jobs from the budget, adversely impacting, to tell the truth, parks, libraries, aging services, health, and some other programs. To continue to meet citizen demands and encourage growth, we now need to restore a portion of that workforce. The budgets that have supported our past investments have also been lean ones. During my time in office, if you look at the dates 2006 and 2007 as the beginning point, the non-public safety workforce, the column identified other city employees column, has been reduced by 7.3%. There simply aren't many places to go for substantial cuts without ending city programs. If you look at the total full-time equivalents column, you'll see that over the course of the administration, the overall workforce has been reduced by 4.5%. Workforce reduction going on during the same period of time when Lincoln has experienced steady growth. Our population has increased in that same time period by 13%, and the city's area has grown by 10%. A good analogy is that the city of Lincoln has grown by the size of the city of Kearney, while our full-time workforce is actually reduced over 4%. This is the heart of the matter. We cannot address the growth in our community. We cannot address the telecommunications revenue shortfall. We cannot address the twin crises of EAB and the police fire pension without either further cuts in service or additional revenues. The Taking Charge prioritization problem is a tool we use to compare the relative importance of the 200 programs that we have in the city. If we have to look at that list with the goal of cutting $3.3 million from the budget, the programs listed here are the ones most in jeopardy. There are programs ranked lower than this list, but those programs were already eliminated during the years immediately following the national recession. So, to protect Lincoln's future, obviously we have new challenges that must be met to maintain Lincoln as a thriving, nationally recognized city. The Emerald Ash Borer is an estimated $29 million problem. It will become an even bigger crisis if we do not act now. The police fire pension funding gap will only grow and create a bigger crisis for our children if we do not act now. Committing the money necessary to solving these problems is the only responsible course of action, in my opinion. But that leaves us with a tough choice. We cannot ignore Lincoln's growth. Our public investments have helped us reach the point that we are at today, which is a thriving economy, a record number of people employed, and a nationally recognized quality of life. Do we continue on the path of city investment that has been the foundation of our national success, or do we reduce that investment and jeopardize future success? In my mind, it isn't a choice. Keeping our momentum going is too important to leave to chance. Current city revenues are not adequate to confront these crises and to continue to foster community growth. As a result of the cuts following the national recession, our workforce has 100 fewer employees. That has left us fewer options. Keeping Lincoln safe requires community investment. Taking care of what we already have requires community investment. Infrastructure improvement requires community investment. There simply is no room for an EAB solution and the police fire pension solution in a budget if we want to continue the investments also that have made us a dynamic community. That's why the 2016-18 budget proposes a 1.2 cent property tax increase to fund the pension and the Emerald Ash Borer response. That's about $18 on a $150,000 home a year to protect our present and to protect our future. Proposing a tax increase is clearly an unpopular political choice. I recognize that it will take faith and grit on everybody's part to support additional revenues. I urge the council to thoughtfully review the case we have made today, because I feel we don't have options to adequately preserve and continue our surging prosperity without this formulation. Let's show the nation that in a period of polarization at the national level, that we in this great city can make the right common sense decision, albeit a tough decision. To my respected colleagues on the council, I say, please be forthright. I'm not open to budget gimmicks and unrealistic promises. I oppose those so-called solutions that promise we can have it all without a measure of sacrifice, that mislead the public into believing that we can reduce taxes and at the same time increase public safety and meet our growth challenges without having to cut beneficial programs or services. The fate of a city is at stake here, and it's not just any city, it's our city and it's our children's city. Lincoln has thrived because we had the courage to look in the mirror and make a realistic assessment of what we see. We must put our personal political interests aside and act in the people's best interest to protect our future. The additional levy necessary to cover the Emerald Ash Borer crisis, the pension funding crisis, combined with the voter-approved water bonds, will increase the city levy by 1.41 cents, or about $1.75 a month on a $150,000 home. Remember that less than 16% of the total property tax levy goes to the city. Other governmental entities like the public schools, the county, the natural resource districts, and others comprise 84% of the total property tax bill. When you factor the proposed city increase into your entire tax levy, the increase is 0.7% annually. Even with this proposed revenue increase, Lincoln's property tax levy stacks up well against the levies of Nebraska's 15 largest cities. We are 10th on the chart of the top 15, and those cities below us may yet have to adjust their levies upward when they set their own budgets for the 2016-17 fiscal year. I think we're the only city that does a 2-year budget, and this chart doesn't even anticipate the 1-year changes coming this year for the other cities. The proposed property tax increase addresses the AAB and the police fire pension challenges, but it does not make up for the 1.7 million shortfall from the telecom tax. In order to add more police officers and firefighter paramedics while meeting the other needs of a growing economy, we need to find 1.7 million of other funding for this problem. And let's talk about that a little bit. We worked hard to increase local and state funding for streets, and those efforts are paying off, greatly accelerating an already full summer of road improvements. As a result, West 8th Street improvements will be started and completed earlier than planned. North 33rd and North 48th Street will be added to the next couple of years in the capital improvement program, and an additional 487 blocks of residential streets will be reviewed and improved. In addition, our 6-year CIP shows street improvement projects at Yankee Hill Road, Pine Lake Road, Rokeby Road, and the 14th Warlick and Old Cheney intersection. And we should all feel good about the fact that the South Beltway is funded in the 6-year CIP. The city is ready and eager to get it going. The increased investment in streets provides us with an opportunity. The city's tax-funded budget provides about 2/3 of the cost of funding our winter snow removal operations. The other third is funded by street funds. My budget proposes a shift to snow removal of about $1.8 million in street funds, freeing $1.8 million that is needed for public safety personnel, better StarTran services, and maintaining the parks, libraries, and aging services on which Lincoln citizens depend. The next chart brings you up to date on the overall street funding. Our progress on streets has been undeniable. We have increased street spending by 58% since 2010, allowing us to complete major projects like South 56, Northwest 48th, Old Cheney, North 84th, South 33rd, Capitol Parkway, Sheridan Boulevard, and several others. Street funding will continue at a record pace even with this proposed shift. More orange is the new orange. Paying for snow removal with street funds is not unusual. The state of Nebraska funds their snow removal with its roads dollars. And until 2010, as you can see from this chart, the city completely funded snow removal with street funds. With the city's dramatic increases in street spending over the last 5 years and all the construction complained about going on in the city already, the shift allows City Hall to protect important community needs until we find another revenue solution. And as you can see on the chart, because of important work done at the legislature, we in fact will still be increasing spending on the roads, notwithstanding the shift. Let's talk a little bit about workforce numbers. 33 employees will be added as part of the 2016-18 budget. That may sound like a large number, especially when compared to the employee reductions of our recent past. It's worth keeping in mind that 33 employees represent about a 1.5 increase in city staffing over a 2-year budget period, less than the city's recent annual growth. These positions were added to accomplish the goals that we set forth in the budget. 10 positions are the new police and firefighter paramedics. 5 new positions are important to economic growth and infrastructure. Another 8 are to improve StarTran and to reduce our expensive StarTran overtime. Increasing accountability and dealing with demands created by growth are the focus of the other 10 positions. Even with the staffing increase represented in this budget, we will still have 67 fewer employees when this is over than when I took office in 2007, 10 budget years ago. Our civilian workforce is 6% smaller. We have implemented new computer software to increase efficiency. We've reorganized departments to increase efficiency. We've constantly implemented new ways of conducting city business to increase efficiency. We've also worked hard as an administration to reduce the use of one-time funding to cover ongoing costs. I'm proud of the fact that this budget for 2016-18 uses far less one-time money than any other budget since I've been here. Only $600,000 is needed in the budget's second year to balance the books. My budget proposes to use $600,000 of the cash reserves available funds, which is $1.2 million at this particular point in time, and we do this to avoid service cuts in parks, libraries, and other citizen services. Budget summary. As you review the budget summary, note that the 4.2% increase in the first year does also reflect an anomaly of our system, the fact that a 27th pay period is included. Every 12 to 13 years, the city has one additional pay period. This 27th pay period requires about $4 million in additional payroll spending. The budget office has been slowly saving that amount so that it does not impact programs or require revenue increases or cuts. However, it does inflate the figure that show how much spending increases. Without the 27th pay period, the city increased spending. The average 2-year change, shown as 2.79%, is much, much closer to 2%. Lincoln residents, I strongly believe, want to maintain the high quality of life that they currently enjoy. Every time I walk around the city, people come up to me and tell me how much they like the whole set of changes that are taking place in this city. They want a place with a strong business climate. They want a place where our young people can find a job. They want livable neighborhoods. They want, and that includes the continuation of our low crime rate. They want services that make Lincoln an attractive place to live their lives. Our parks, our trails, our libraries, our new public spaces not only attract visitors and lend to the marketability of our community, but they give common purposes and unite us with our neighbors. The investments proposed in the 2016-18 budget will help us accomplish our goals and ensure a bright and dynamic future for the city. The picture on this slide is to remind us that we only reap what we sow and tend to with care. That's it. I kept that as short as possible. I hope you're enormously grateful for that.
Thank you, Mayor Beitler. I know we have a full week of budget hearings where we can dive deeply into the details of your budget, but are there any questions from council members now that you'd like to ask? Or Carl, then Jane.
Mayor, first of all, thanks for the presentation. It seems like very early on you mentioned the increase in the community's population and size. Do you have data on what you project the growth of the city to be for the future? Is that something that you've thought about?
Well, we've certainly thought about it, but I can't say that off the top of my head I have specific data looking forward. I'm fairly certain, though, that the projected rate, increased rate of growth is assumed to be roughly equivalent, assuming that we're able to find people for our workforce. I think that's a critical problem that may affect growth. And so the investments represented in this budget, the $200,000 to the chamber to work on workforce programs, things like that would affect that rate, but there's no reason at the moment to expect that rate will be anything less in the next 2 to 4 years, that's for sure.
It's the population growth is somewhere 1.5%,
Yes.
something like that, and so somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 new individuals every year.
A little bit more than that probably, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Jane.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm kind of curious why we singled out pension and EAB, because clearly the community has identified public safety as their priority, and it's certainly our priority too. I wonder if some of those budget numbers, like for example the 6 fully funding the 2 police officers that were hired in the previous budget cycle, plus additional 4 and additional 6 firefighter paramedics and additional staffing for StarTran, are those numbers, could they have been interchangeable in your presentation?
Could they have been interchangeable in what sense?
In the presentation where you have focused on the cost to address the pension deficit on an annual basis of $981,000, or the funding of $950,000 for addressing the problem with the emerald ash borer. I mean, it seems like there's plenty of problems to go around. Could you have interchanged those financial numbers with the ones that you singled out for emerald ash borer and the pension? Or what was the reasoning for selecting those 2 when it seems like there's a lot of other ones that are equally pressing?
Well, I think the reason probably that we emphasize those 2 is that they are of the nature of extraordinary longer-term problems that have arisen at the moment. And either we have to divert funds to take care of those matters, or we take care of those matters and continue to take care of the every year sets of problems that are presented to us, or have been presented to us since I've been here anyway. and of those everyday problems that relate to the quality of the city as perceived by the citizens. I mean, certainly we have identified in this text those things that we know are important to you, because they are important to the citizens. So we're mentioning police and fire, we're mentioning parks and libraries, and trying to remind you, as we try to remind ourselves, that people like what's going on in the city now. I think they like the proportionality between the different departments and what's being spent in the different departments. I think we got a good game going, and we need to put some more effort into that game.
John.
Well, I also thank you for your presentation and the work that you and your staff put together. A couple of questions. When we look under the budget, and I think it follows up a little bit with what Ms. Rabel was saying on the public safety side, what efforts do you see in the next 2 years can be made to somewhat modernize our approach? And for example, system status management, you're talking about adding a 7th ambulance and those 6 firefighters, which is 24-hour service, and yet we don't need 24-hour service. If you follow system status management, you have peak times. Secondly, I guess, what would you see being done to work with the unions? You recall the Pension Review Committee made its recommendation that helped save a $3.8 million deficit in this year's budget, but at the same time it had 8 or 9 other recommendations that need to be implemented to ensure that the police and firefighters pension is sound in the long term, that this is really a short-term fix. And so I guess I'd ask on that. And then the third area would be on just our public works and the way we maintain our street maintenance, which is another big part of the picture here. What are we doing to be more preventative in the initial design as well as the maintenance? Things like sealing those cracks and so forth so we don't get broken streets.
Do they get one question at a time, Madam Chair? What's the deal here?
No, I'm a fan of questions.
No,
I'll
I'm
let him
just
have
kidding.
3.
I'll do the best I can here, John,
I apologize.
to
That
remember
was
the parts of your
yeah.
question. But
Well, I think
first of all, let me say thank you to you for all. Historically, you have been the one that has kept a critical eye on the police fire pension, on and some of our public practices in the area of public safety, and certainly some changes have happened over time because you kept focused on it. And I see clearly that you intend to stay focused on it for a continuing period of time. And I think this may be a very good time, given Trent's great work with the committee on developing some recommendations. The 13th check has been decided. There are some things in the budget to be talked about, and after the budget is over, I think we will go back to the recommendations of the committee and see what the council's appetite is for further change. Roads construction, that is, maybe I should just say fundamentally in terms of my own feelings about things and what we've done and haven't done, I want to get back to roads construction again. I think we need to do more there, and we are doing more, as I hope I've illustrated here today. We're doing about as much as the public has an appetite for at the moment. But we will continue to live at the edge of that tolerance level, I hope, because we're not catching up nearly as fast as I thought we could. And certainly the administration's mind is open to the next financial step with regard to further improvement of roads.
Thank you.
Trent?
In your presentation, you broke out the entire police and fire pension payment as a $980,000 payment, but that's not new spending. We've put in the last couple years anywhere from probably 500 to 800 some $1,000s, but you've broken it out as part of the new levy, in what the increase. I'm wondering why you're making that case that it's, because I would say that maybe that's only $150,000 or $200,000 worth of new spending, not $980,000. Can you kind of walk us through why you've separated that out as one line item and attached a increase in levy to that?
Well, I think, Trent, that it's a combination of things. And we had many internal discussions about how we talk about that difference between what was happening in the year 2007 and what was happening in the next coming years with regard to the huge discrepancy of the amount of money, the increased amount of money that's being taken out of the budget to cover the police fire pension. If I'm not answering your question here, tell me. But the answer is, for me, in part, is that we reached a limit on how much money we could find in other parts of the budget for ourselves. In our political judgment, we reached a limit. And that's the amount that we think needs to be covered, not by looking to cuts in other places, but by looking to revenue increases.
I don't mind the fact that you've shown it in what the levy cost is to the taxpayers, but I feel like about 800,000 of that is not new spending. So I feel like it's covering some other measure of spending in the budget that might be new, that we might be able to see, because you're making the case that you need a property tax increase of almost 1.2 cents, and half of that is the entire payment to the police and fire pension. But underneath that is somewhere in the area of, $700,000-800,000 in new spending that's different than the actual police and fire pension payment.
I looked upon it as spending that we could not sustain, that we had been spending in the past and was already eating out of resources applicable to other items. And that eating away of those resources, as we put new things in place, we couldn't put in place the maintenance mechanisms for those things. The city's grown, we've added a lot to the city. We need to add to the maintenance of those things. And the continual pressure of the police fire pension has not allowed us to do that.
I completely agree with you there. I'm just, I guess, being critical of the way that it's been shown as here are the two items that are driving that, which you're 100% right that the police and fire pension fund.
I mean, in my opinion, that figure should have been $3 or $4 million, because that's what the additional pressure is that's been put on this administration over that 7-year period.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you at all. It just, from my standpoint, about $700,000-800,000 in this budget, that would be a payment that we would have made anyway.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that perspective, and I hope you understand that it's hard to describe that pressure altogether in a few words. But to me, it's not a matter of this last year. It's a matter of several years before that, where we've been towing the line to make these pension payments, and they've hurt.
Just in your presentation, it just made it look like, hey, this is a payment that we haven't made before, or that this was all new, $900,000 worth of spending. That's just my only critique.
The trend line is brand new in our history.
It is
Very new and very rough.
We've had this discussion before. I
Okay.
completely appreciate that.
Steve, did you want to comment?
Well, I just wanted to add that we've been able to contribute the amounts that we have contributed a couple of times because we've done year-end transfers that weren't budgeted and weren't ongoing or sustainable. So thinking back to when your committee was active, Trent, you saw our contribution levels. We plugged holes at the end of the year a couple times, and so this provides a more sustainable source of funding for the plan.
So what would that base have been? It would have been like 7.8 or 780,000?
I think what we started with was last year's budget, which I think shows about 6.3 or 6.4 million.
Okay.
And then on top of that, we collect eventually that 9% of the levy that we can't budget. So that gets us up around 7 million. And then to get to the point where we're at and what the actuary recommends with the changes, it's about $980,000 above that.
In the last fiscal year, what was our payment?
I think we got our actual collections into the fund. I think we're about 7 million last year, but we also, that included that 9% plus maybe it's more than that actually, because we put some money in there at the end of the fiscal year last year. We transferred money in. So, but that, again, that last piece of that is not sustainable or was not built into the budget.
Can I jump in just real quick? The short answer is the amount of funds from 2015-16 to 2016-17 is $981,000 greater in ongoing funds. What Steve is trying to tell you is we used one-time money several times in the past that has not been budgeted. And the difference between the ongoing funds in 2015-16 and 16-17 is $981,000. Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt because you may have more questions, but I hope to do a housekeeping thing when you get a moment.
Thank you. Do you have any questions, Cindy? Okay, Jane?
I just have one more question that goes back to the pension. I think there was one slide, Mayor, that you had presented that showed, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it said our pension liability in 2008 was 3.5 million. And then in 2016, we were looking at a 12.8 million pension obligation. But because of the action that the city council took to transfer the funding from one account to the main account with that paycheck, it reduced it from 12.8 to 7.8. So in 2008, it was 3.5, and now it's 7.8. Was that right? Did I have that? Okay. I know.
Yeah. I think the chart is accurate,
Okay.
best of my knowledge.
That number shocked me, that increase, the dramatic increase, so.
Yeah.
Any further questions? I have one. In the presentation you gave, Mayor Beitler, I couldn't help noticing one of the slides mentioned that the levy is 39% lower than it was in 1993. Can you explain what you mean by that? Or
Well,
can Steve?
I mean exactly what it says. The levy, I don't have the exact numbers, and maybe Steve does, but generally speaking, the city's property tax levy in the early 1990s was way up, much, much higher than it is today. I don't know all of the reasons for that. In the late 1990s, sales taxes, I think maybe the rate was allowed to be increased, but in any event, if the rate was not increased, the revenues were increasing tremendously, and the property tax levy was cut in a most serious fashion, and levies in recent years have been far, far below any levies that were experienced up until the middle of the 1990s.
Yeah, we had a levy at one time that was over 50 cents, and that was, I think, in 1993. And then we had, somewhere in there, we had a huge property revaluation, which I think was about 20%. And as the Mayor mentioned, I believe it began in 1993, we started seeing the benefits of opening up North 27th Street. And there was tremendous growth in sales tax. It was 5, 6, 7, 8% a year. So it allowed the property tax levy to be reduced. And that went on for several years, actually.
How,
I think in fairness, though, the dollar amount we collected from property taxes has never gone down. It's always gone up. So even with that change from 50 mills down to 30 mills or 29 mills, we still collected more dollars. It was a huge revaluation of property.
Yeah. You're
So
right.
it's just
Jim.
being realistic. So the dollar amount, taxes did not go down.
I just want to follow up with Steve, and then I'll call on you. You mentioned sales tax growth. How does the sales tax growth for the next 2 years look compared to what you've just discussed?
We're looking at a 4% increase each of the next 2 years. You might remember in the budget we're finishing up, each of the years we had 4.5%. We struggled a little bit to get to what we projected, so we reduced that amount for the upcoming budget.
Do you have any thoughts on why we're not hitting those targets?
I would guess more than anything, I hate to blame anything specifically. However, I got to believe internet usage, and even though a lot of merchants still do charge sales tax, there's some that don't, and I got to believe that's hurting our sales tax receipts.
Jane?
Since we're talking about the mill levy, the mayor's proposed with the increase, it would raise our mill levy to 33.3 cents, correct?
33.7.
0.7. How does that compare to the city of Omaha? What is their mill levy?
I think it would be on our chart there. Okay.
Okay.
Significantly
Way
higher.
Okay, I just wanted to get that clarified, how we stack up to Omaha.
It's up in the 40s. Yeah.
It's what?
48.9 cents.
48.9?
Any further questions from council? Thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll look forward to starting the budget hearings in just a few minutes. Sorry, Rick,
Thank you
you
for
had
listening.
something you wanted to pass out?
Last night, I emailed to you all prioritized lists that you had requested. I also printed it out in case you wanted to utilize it today for the hearings. I just want to briefly